Montana Territory, spring of 1858. The last snows had melted from the high passes 3 weeks prior, leaving the mountain meadows waterlogged and the creeks running wild with snowmelt that carried the smell of pine and ancient stone. The trading post sat in a clearing, hacked from dense timber, its squared logs chinked with clay and moss, its shake roof leaking in 4 places now, instead of 3. The oiled paper windows had torn last winter and been patched with strips of deer hide that let in light, but no view, and the porch sagged on the east end where a support beam had rotted through and nobody had the money or energy to replace it. Inside the main room carried the permanent scent of old smoke, cured meat and furs that had hung too long without selling. Once this place had been the hub of mountain commerce for 70 miles in any direction. Trappers brought their beaver pelts through here. Traders stopped on their way to Fort Benton. Wagon trains bound for Oregon or California would rest and resupply, paying good money for flour and coffee and ammunition. Thomas Hartwell had run a tight operation in those days, fair in his dealings and sharp in his trading. The post had prospered. The family had prospered. Then Thomas Hartwell froze to death 4 winters back, drunk and confused, wandering off into a January blizzard after a night of whiskey that had started as one drink to warm his bones and ended as a bottle to drown something nobody could name. They found him 2 days later, stiff as a plank, not 70 yards from the cabin door. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A man who'd survived Blackfoot raids and grizzly attacks done in by his own demons in a bottle. Since then, everything had gone to hell in a slow grinding slide. Catherine Hartwell tried to hold it together, but she was no trader. The beaver market had collapsed anyway, silk hats replacing felt back east. The wagon trains took newer routes. The post was dying by inches, and everyone who passed through could see it in the dusty shelves in the empty storage room, in the way Catherine's face had gone tight and gray with worry that never left her. In that rough frontier world caught between survival and collapse lived Catherine's 2 daughters, different as fire and ice, different as gold and iron. Rose the younger at 23 moved through that rough world like she was floating through a St. Louis ballroom. Blonde as September wheat with cornflower blue eyes and a figure that made even grizzled trappers lose their train of thought mid-sentence. She'd somehow maintained an air of Eastern refinement despite growing up on the raw frontier like she'd been born into the wrong life and never quite accepted it. Her dresses, though simple by city standards, were always the finest they could afford, always fitted just so, always in colors that made her shine like morning sun on new snow. She had a laugh like honey dripping off a spoon sweet and calculated to land exactly where she aimed it. Every trapper, trader, and drifter who passed through fell a little bit in love with Rose Hartwell. She collected their admiration the way other women collected firewood, necessary fuel for getting through hard times. She knew her value in a territory where unmarried women were scarcer than honest poker games and twice as valuable. Her beauty was her currency, and she spent it wisely, never giving too much, always leaving them wanting more. Then there was Emma. Emma Hartwell was 27 years old, and most of the territory had written her off as a spinster 3 years ago. Nobody quite remembered if she'd been pretty as a child before the accidents and hard living had left their marks. A dark birthmark, roughly the size and shape of a thumbprint, shadowed her left cheek. It wasn't hideous, but it was noticeable. The kind of thing eyes caught and then slid away from, embarrassed. Her walk carried a permanent hitch, a slight drag of her right foot from a rattlesnake bite when she was 9 years old. The venom hadn't killed her, but it had withered the muscles in her calf, leaving her with a limp that got worse when she was tired or the weather turned cold. In April, with the ground still damp and the morning air sharp, she limped more than she walked. Her brown hair, the color of creek water over stone, stayed pulled back in a simple braid or bun. No ribbons, no adornments. She had her father's gray eyes, the color of storm clouds over the mountains, and they looked at the world with a kind of quiet resignation. Not bitterness exactly. More like she'd already made peace with her lot and found it wanting but acceptable. There was no fight in those eyes, just acceptance. This is what I am. This is what I have. It will have to be enough. While Rose held court in the main room entertaining visitors and practicing her charms, Emma did the real work that kept the post running. She tended the root cellar, organized and preserved their meat supply, grew medicinal herbs in a patch she'd cleared behind the post, kept the account books in her careful script, and managed the endless tasks of frontier survival that nobody noticed until they weren't done. She could butcher a deer, set a snare line, identify 100 different plants and their uses, and shoot well enough to keep the meat pot filled when her mother couldn't afford to hire hunters. Her dresses ran to practical gray wool and faded calico patched and repatched, made for work, not show. She didn't expect to be noticed and generally wasn't. She'd learned early, watching Rose bloom while she faded into the background, that when the sun decides who to shine on shadow is where you learn to make your home. And she'd made a good home there in that shadow. Useful, capable, invisible. Catherine Hartwell knew the brutal arithmetic of their situation. The trading post was bleeding money like a gut-shot elk. The furs piled in the storage room weren't selling. The shelves of trade goods gathered dust. The debts Thomas had left behind grew like weeds every month, and the bank in Helena was making noises about foreclosure. She had maybe 6 months a year, if she was lucky, and the winter was mild before she'd lose everything. The post, the land, the roof over their heads. All of it would go to pay what Thomas had owed. Her only real asset, her only hope of salvation, was marrying one of her daughters to a man with means. In the harsh calculus of frontier survival, Rose was the obvious investment. Beautiful, charming, young enough to bear many children. She was the golden ticket the way out. Emma was useful around the place, but no man's prize. Catherine loved both her daughters in her way, but love didn't pay debts or put food on the table. Practicality did. And practically speaking, Emma's best use was helping run things until Rose caught the right husband. That April morning when word came that Cole Bennett was riding in and looking to marry Catherine, felt something like hope for the first time in months. She'd heard of Bennett, everyone in the territory had. He was maybe 39 or 40, depending on who you asked. He ran trap lines from the Rockies all the way to the Bitterroots, traded with the Crow and Shoshone, and owned a profitable operation up in the high country near the Madison River. More importantly, he had money. Not rich by Eastern standards, but by Montana Territory standards. In 1858, he was solid, reliable, successful. Word was he wanted a wife. Not for love or companionship, just someone practical to help run his operation, cook his meals, mend his gear, keep a home in the wilderness. Some said he'd been widowed young and never recovered. Others claimed he'd never married at all, that some woman back east had broken his heart so thoroughly he'd come west to forget, and had spent the last 15 years doing exactly that, trapping beaver and building walls around whatever heart he had left. The post erupted in a flurry of preparation. Catherine had their hired girl, Dawn, running a half-Shoshone woman of about 32 with quick hands and knowing eyes, sweep out the main room and scrub the plank table. She set out their best tin cups, the ones without dents, and pulled out a side of venison to make a decent stew. She sent Emma to gather fresh herbs and Rose to make herself presentable. Rose needed no encouragement. She understood the opportunity immediately. This wasn't just another trapper passing through. This was a man with means looking for a wife. She disappeared into the small room that she shared with Emma and emerged an hour later, transformed. Her best dress, the blue calico with the tiny white flowers that made her eyes even bluer. Her blonde hair brushed until it shone like spun gold and arranged to fall in careful waves over her shoulders. A touch of berry stain on her lips and cheeks. She looked like a princess somehow misplaced in the wilderness, beautiful and delicate and entirely out of place, which was exactly the effect she wanted. Emma, meanwhile, was out back, splitting kindling, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, hands already rough and stained with work. Nobody thought to call her in. Nobody considered she might want to make herself presentable too. She was just Emma after all, the useful one, the one who kept things running, not the one anyone came to see. Late afternoon they heard the horse, not the multiple horses of a pack train or the rattle of a wagon, just one horse steady and unhurried, the sound of hoofbeats carrying clear in the mountain air. Cole Bennett rode into the clearing on a rangy buckskin gelding, the kind of tough mountain horse that could go all day on sparse feed and bad ground. He sat his saddle like he'd grown there easy and natural, a man completely at home in wild country. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the lean, corded build of someone who lived on venison and hard work. His face was weathered dark from sun and wind, carved into hard angles that suggested nothing came easy, and he preferred it that way. Dark beard touched with gray, trimmed close. Dark hair hanging past his collar under a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better years. He wore buckskin trousers stained and worn a wool shirt gone gray from countless washings and a beaded vest that looked like crowwork. A Hawken rifle rode in a scabbard on his saddle, and a big knife hung at his belt. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who lived in the mountains and answered to nobody. His eyes, when they swept the post, were dark and unreadable. Not cold exactly, but guarded, watchful. The eyes of a man who'd learned not to give anything away for free. Catherine greeted him with the closest thing to grace she could muster. "Mr. Bennett, we're honored. Please come sit. We've got stew and fresh cornbread." He dismounted with economical movements, no wasted motion, and tied his horse to the porch rail. "Ma'am." His voice was deep, rough-edged, the voice of a man who spent more time talking to horses in mountains than people. They served the meal under the big cottonwood tree in the yard, the only spot with enough shade this time of day. The plank table wobbled on the uneven ground. Tin plates, horn-handled utensils, food that was good and plain. Catherine sat at one end, Rose on one side, positioned to catch the best light, an empty seat across from her, obviously intended for Bennett. He sat. Rose turned the full force of her attention on him, and it was considerable. She had that gift, making a man feel like he was the only person in the world when she looked at him. "Mr. Bennett Mothers told me so much about your success in the mountains. It must be terribly exciting living so wild and free." He spooned stew into his mouth, chewed, swallowed. "It's living. Not much exciting about checking trap lines in January." She laughed like he'd said something clever. "Oh, but surely there must be adventures. Encounters with Indians, dangerous animals, those sorts of things." "Indians are mostly just people trying to get by, same as anyone. Animals are dangerous if you're stupid around them. Mostly it's cold, wet work that breaks your back and makes you old before your time." He ate methodically, not impolite but not engaged either. Rose tried again, shifting tactics. "Still, a man of your capabilities must have interesting stories." "Got a few." He didn't elaborate. Catherine jumped in, trying to smooth the conversation. "Rose is quite accomplished herself. She sews beautifully, plays the fiddle, sings. She'd make a fine frontier wife, capable and cultured both." "I'm sure she would." Non-committal. His eyes flicked across the yard, taking in the posts, the outbuildings, the state of things. Assessing, calculating. Then his gaze caught on something. Emma had emerged from behind the storehouse carrying an armload of split wood. She wore a faded dress the color of old smoke patched at the elbows. Her braid had half come loose, strands of brown hair escaping around her face. She was limping more than usual, the leg clearly tired from a long day's work. She didn't see them under the tree, or if she did, she gave no sign. She just headed for the woodpile, intent on her task. Bennett watched her stack the wood with practiced efficiency, every movement economical, purposeful, the way she tested each piece to make sure it would burn clean, the way she arranged the pile for easy access. Small things, but they spoke of competence, of someone who thought ahead. "Who's that?" Catherine glanced over, surprised. "Oh, that's Emma, my eldest. She manages most of the practical affairs around here." "Emma." He repeated it like he was testing the name, testing the weight of it. He watched her finish with the wood and head back toward the storehouse, favoring that bad leg, but not letting it stop her. Then he set down his spoon and looked directly at Catherine. "Ma'am, I appreciate the hospitality and the meal, but I should be clear about why I came." "Of course." Catherine sat straighter. Rose leaned forward slightly, her smile perfect. Bennett cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. "I need a wife. Not for romance or companionship. I need someone practical. Someone who can work hard, won't complain about rough living, and won't expect things I can't give. I've been asking around, and folks said you had daughters of marrying age." "We do indeed." Catherine gestured to Rose. He nodded slowly, then with the same directness he'd used to discuss the price of beaver pelts. "With due respects to your household, ma'am, I'd like permission to court Emma." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the cottonwood leaves rustling overhead. A crow called from somewhere in the pines. The creek running past the property murmured over stones. Catherine's face went blank with shock. Rose's smile froze, then cracked, then shattered into something ugly before she could control it. Her face flushed red, then white, the color draining away like water from a broken dam. Emma, who'd been heading back toward them and was close enough now to hear, stopped walking. She stood maybe 20 feet away, wood chips still clinging to her dress, strands of hair stuck to her sweaty forehead, one hand unconsciously rubbing her bad leg. Her gray eyes went wide, not with joy or excitement, but with pure confusion. The word came out harder than she probably intended, sharp with years of being overlooked, years of being the one nobody chose. Why, Bennett stood, walked across the yard to stand in front of her. Up close, she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was much taller, much broader, but he didn't loom. He just stood there, solid as a pine tree, and looked at her with those dark, guarded eyes. Because you're practical. Because you don't expect things you can't have. Because you work hard and don't quit. He hesitated, then finished. Because you're real. Not playing a part, just real. Emma stared at him. Around them, the world seemed to hold its breath. A breeze moved through the cottonwood. Somewhere that crow called again. She could feel her mother's shock. Rose's rage. The weight of a moment that would change everything. I'm not pretty. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. I limp. I've got this mark on my face. I'm 27 and nobody's wanted me yet. If you're looking for, I'm not looking for pretty. He interrupted her, and there was something in his voice now. Something like certainty. I'm looking for someone who won't break when the snow's 10 feet deep and the meat's running low. Someone who knows how to survive. That you, she held his gaze. Her chin came up slightly. Something shifted in her posture, some old spine of pride she'd thought was long buried. Yes. Then that's why. He glanced back at Catherine. Ma'am, do I have your permission? Catherine looked like she'd been hit with a board. Beside her, Rose had gone completely still, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't the plan. Rose was the prize. Emma was just Emma, useful but unremarkable, the sister who existed to make Rose shine brighter by comparison. But Catherine was also practical. Bennett was solid, established, exactly what they needed. And he wanted Emma. It made no sense, but refusing him would be foolish. They couldn't afford foolish. They couldn't afford anything except survival. Yes, you have my permission, if Emma is willing. Bennett looked back at Emma. Well, Emma's hands were shaking slightly. She clasped them together to still them. Every instinct told her this was wrong, that there had to be a catch, that men like him didn't choose women like her. But he stood there waiting, patient and serious, and there was no deception in his face, just certainty. Like he'd already made the calculation and arrived at the answer, and the answer was her. Yes, her voice was stronger now. I'm willing. Something shifted in his expression. Too quick to read. Relief maybe, or satisfaction at a good trade made. Good, I've got to check my lines, but I'll be back in 3 days. We can talk more then. He nodded to Catherine, ignored Rose completely. Gave Emma one more long look that seemed to see right through her skin to something underneath, something she'd forgotten was there. Then he mounted his buckskin and rode out just like that. No ceremony, no explanation. Just a mountain man who'd come for one thing, gotten it, and left. The three women stood in the yard as the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Rose turned without a word and walked into the post, her back rigid with rage. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the frame. Catherine stared at Emma like she'd never seen her before. Like her plain, limping, unmarriageable daughter had just performed some kind of magic trick. And Emma stood there in the cooling afternoon, wood chips in her hair, and her heart hammering against her ribs, wondering what in God's name had just happened and whether she'd made the biggest mistake of her life or been given the only chance she'd ever get. That night, sleep refused to come. Emma lay in the narrow bed she'd slept in her whole life, staring at the rough-hewn rafters barely visible in the darkness, listening to Rose's angry breathing from across the small room they shared. Her sister hadn't spoken a single word to her since Bennett left. The silence was louder than shouting would have been. It filled the room like smoke, thick and suffocating. Emma's mind spun like a mill wheel, grinding the same questions over and over. Why had he chosen her? It made no sense. Men didn't choose women like her. They chose women like Rose, beautiful and charming and whole. She was none of those things. She was marked, damaged, plain. The best she'd ever hoped for was maybe becoming some widower's second wife, someone to care for his children and keep his house while he remembered a dead woman he'd actually loved. But Cole Bennett had looked at her and seen something. What? She didn't know. Probably nothing good. Probably he just needed a workhorse, not a wife. Someone to scrub his floors and mend his clothes and warm his bed when the nights got cold, all without expecting affection or tenderness in return. The thought should have insulted her. Maybe it would have once. But Emma had learned to be practical about life. This was likely the only offer she'd ever get, and being a mountain man's drudge up in the high country was probably better than slowly starving at a failing trading post while watching her beautiful sister marry someone else. She must have slept eventually, because next thing she knew, gray dawn light was filtering through the deer-hide windows. Rose's bed was empty, which meant her sister had risen before her for the first time in years, probably just to avoid having to look at Emma's face. Emma rose dressed and started the day's work. The fire needed building, coffee needed making, bread needed starting. The same tasks she'd done every morning for as long as she could remember, but now they felt different somehow. Like she was performing them for the last time. Like everything was about to change, and she couldn't decide if that terrified her or thrilled her or both at once. Catherine came out when the coffee was ready. She gave Emma a long, measuring look, but said nothing at first. Just accepted the cup Emma handed her and stood by the window staring out at the yard where just yesterday everything had been simple and terrible in the familiar ways. Finally, you understand what you agreed to. I agreed to let him court me, not to marry him. He'll expect marriage. Men like that don't court for fun. I know. What would you have had me say? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then carefully, I'd planned for Rose. I know that too. Emma kept her voice even. No accusation in it, just fact. Rose was the plan. Rose had always been the plan, but Bennett hadn't asked for Rose. Do you know why he chose you? No idea. Emma poured her own coffee. But I'm not fool enough to question it too close. Maybe he'll change his mind before he comes back. He didn't. 3 days later, right when he'd said, Cole Bennett rode back into the clearing. This time he didn't stop at the main post. He rode around back to where Emma was working in her herb garden, pulling early weeds and checking what had survived the winter. She heard the horse, looked up, and there he was sitting easy in the saddle looking down at her. Need to talk, by way of greeting. No preamble. Emma stood brushing dirt from her hands. All right. Somewhere private. She led him down to the creek out of earshot of the post. The water ran high and fast, snowmelt making it dangerous. They stood on the bank, and for a long moment, neither spoke. A dipper bird worked the rocks, dunking and popping up, going about its business like their presence didn't matter at all. Finally, Bennett broke the silence. I don't deal in pretty words or false promises, so I'm going to lay this out plain. Please do. Emma kept her eyes on the creek, not him. Safer that way. I live rough. Cabins, one room, maybe 14 by 16 feet. No neighbors for 20 miles. Winters are hard, summers are short. I'm gone sometimes for weeks running trap lines. The work's endless, and most of it's heavy. It's lonely up there, and it's dangerous. Bears, wolves, storms that come up out of nowhere. One mistake can kill you. I understand. I don't think you do. His voice was harder now. I'm not offering you comfort. I'm not offering you safety. I'm barely offering you survival. She turned to face him then, her gray eyes steady. What are you offerings? He met her gaze. Partnership, respect, honesty, a share in what I build. Protection best I can give it. He paused. Something shifted in his face. But not love. I can't offer that. Won't lie and say I can. Because you don't have it to give. Because I gave it once and it near killed me. The words came out harsh. Then he checked himself like he'd revealed more than he meant to. Woman back in Pennsylvania. Was young and stupid. Thought we'd marry. She left 2 days before the wedding. Ran off with a cavalry officer heading west. Left me a note saying I was too hard, too cold, too much wilderness, and not enough civilization. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right. I am those things. That's why I'm here instead of there. He shifted his weight. So I'm telling you straight. I'll be faithful. I'll work hard. I'll provide. But I can't give you softness or sweet words or whatever women dream about. That's not in me anymore. Oma was quiet for a long moment watching the creek rush past. Then she said in a voice that was both gentle and brutal in its honesty, I've been invisible my whole life. My mother loves Rose more, though she'd never say it out loud. Men look past me to get to her. I've made my peace with being second choice or third or no choice at all. So you being honest about not loving me, that doesn't hurt, Mr. Bennett. What would hurt is you pretending something you don't feel. He looked at her like he was seeing her properly for the first time. You're tougher than you look. Have to be. Weak things don't survive out here. No, they don't. A bird called from the trees. The creek sang over stones. The moment stretched between them. So, Bennett said, you still willing? If I say yes, what happens next? I court you proper, come by regular for a few weeks. Let you see more of who I am. Let me see more of you. If we still suit after that, we marry. Simple ceremony, nothing fancy. Then you come up to my place and we start building a life. And if we don't suit, then we call it off. No hard feelings. Emma almost smiled. No hard feelings. That's a fair offer, Mr. Bennett. Cole. If we're doing this, you call me Cole. Emma. I know. The way he said it like her name was something worth remembering made something in her chest go warm. Then yes, Cole. I'm still willing. He nodded once, satisfied. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small piece of paper folded careful and handed it to her. Read that when you're alone. I'm better at writing than talking. Then he mounted up and rode off, leaving her standing by the rushing creek with a piece of paper clutched in her hand. She waited until he was out of sight before she unfolded it. The handwriting was rough but clear, the letters formed with obvious effort by a man unused to writing anything but supply lists and account tallies. Your absence bothers me more than your presence should. I don't understand it, but it's true. CB Emma read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it in her pocket against her heart and walked back to the post with something very much like hope blooming in her chest for the first time in longer than she could remember. The courting, if you could call it that, was unlike anything Emma had ever imagined. Not that she'd imagined much. By 27, she'd long since stopped entertaining fantasies about romance or marriage. Those were Rose's territory, Rose's dreams. Emma had made her peace with being useful instead of wanted. But Cole Bennett came by every 3 or 4 days, always with purpose, never just to visit. He'd bring meat from a hunt, a haunch of elk, or strings of cleaned rabbits. He'd check if they needed anything from Fort Benton. He'd help repair the leaking roof or shore up the sagging porch, his hands knowing exactly what to do with hammer and nails and weathered wood. He wasn't romantic, but he was reliable as sunrise. They'd talk while they worked. He'd split wood while she hung the laundry. She'd pack supplies while he checked his horse's shoes. Conversation came easier when hands were busy, when you didn't have to look directly at each other and feel the weight of what you were building. He told her about life in the high country, the rhythms of the seasons, how winter up there wasn't the same winter they had here at the post, but something deeper, more absolute, the kind of cold that made your breath freeze in your lungs, the kind of silence that could drive some men mad and make others sane. He'd seen both, men who came up into the mountains looking for solitude and found only loneliness and left broken. Men who came up looking for nothing and found everything. She told him about managing the post, the tricks of preserving food through winter, how to can venison so it didn't go rancid, which roots stored longest, the medicinal uses of plants he'd walked past 1,000 times without seeing, yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, wild onion for infections. The mountains were full of medicine if you knew where to look. One afternoon, maybe a week into the courting, she was showing him her herb garden. Small plot behind the storehouse, protected from wind by the building's bulk. Not much, but she'd coaxed life from the rocky soil. Comfrey and feverfew sage and wild mint transplanted carefully from the woods. You know a lot. He crouched beside the feverfew, touching the leaves carefully like they might break. Where'd you learn it? Books mostly. My father had some medical texts, and from Dawn running. She knows more about healing plants than any white doctor. You read Latin? He looked surprised, the first real expression she'd seen break through that weathered stillness. Some. Enough to puzzle out the plant names. Father taught us, both me and Rose. She hated it. I liked it. What else you like? The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked her that in years. Maybe ever. I don't know. She stood brushing dirt from her hands. Growing things, solving problems, making order out of chaos. What about you? He thought about it, really thought like the question mattered. Silence, mountains, watching weather roll in, a good horse, coffee so strong it fights back. She laughed, quick and surprised. It felt strange laughing. She didn't do it often. The sound came out rusty like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. He looked at her when she laughed, really looked, and something in his face softened just slightly. You should do that more. What laugh suits you? The words settled around her like a warm shawl on a cold morning. Nobody had ever said anything suited her before. The plain sister, the limping sister, the useful one, but Cole Bennett said laughter suited her, and the way he said it made her believe he meant it. The gifts started appearing without explanation. Small things, but they felt enormous. A doeskin pouch with her initials burned into the leather. E.R. Emma Rose Hartwell. She found it on the porch railing one morning, the leather soft and perfectly cured, the stitching tight and even. Inside, a handful of coffee beans. Real coffee, not the chicory they'd been cutting it with to make it last. A small knife with a good edge perfect for her herb work. The handle was wrapped in thin leather strips, the blade sharp enough to split a hair. She found it on the table in the herb garden, resting on a flat stone like an offering. A length of red ribbon, the first pretty thing anyone had given her in years. Maybe the first pretty thing anyone had given her ever. She found it tied to the post beside her bed, and when she held it up, the color was like blood, like sunset, like something alive. He never mentioned them, never waited around to see her find them, just left them where she'd discover them and rode away like he was embarrassed by his own generosity. She responded in kind, left things in his camp when he wasn't there. Bread still warm from the oven wrapped in cloth. Socks she'd knit from wool she'd spun herself thick and warm. His torn shirt, which he'd left draped over his saddle one day, mended so carefully you could barely see the repair unless you knew where to look. They were building something, slowly like birds building a nest one twig at a time. Not love, maybe. Neither of them had said that word, and she suspected neither of them would. But something solid, something real. A foundation you could stand on when the ground started to shake. Rose watched it all with mounting fury. She'd started making cutting remarks. Little poisonous observations delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I suppose Emma's just his type, sturdy, like a plow horse. Or, I hear mountain men don't expect much, lucky for some. Emma ignored her. It was easier than fighting. Rose had always been like this when she didn't get what she wanted. Sharp and mean, her beauty turning into a weapon she wielded without care for who got hurt. Emma had spent a lifetime developing calluses against her sister's cruelty. One more layer wouldn't make much difference. But one evening Rose went too far. They were all in the main room after supper. Cole had stayed late helping Catherine figure out her account books, which were a mess of crossed-out numbers and desperate calculations. The debts were worse than Emma had thought, worse than Catherine had let on. They had maybe 3 months before the bank came calling, not 6. The discovery sat heavy in the room like smoke. Rose sat by the fire sewing, or pretending to sew. Mostly she was watching Cole with those blue eyes that usually made men stupid. But Cole kept his attention on the numbers, running his finger down columns, making notes in the margin with a stub of pencil. Finally Rose spoke. Her voice was sweet as poisoned honey. Tell me, Mr. Bennett, what is it that draws a man to someone so very practical? I've always wondered. Cole looked up from the account books. His face was unreadable. Guess I'm a practical man. Oh, I'm sure. Rose's smile could have cut glass. But still, don't you ever want something more, something beautiful to come home to instead of just useful? The room went very quiet. Emma's hands stilled on the beans she was shelling. Catherine looked horrified, but before she could intervene, Cole spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which made his words hit harder. Beauty is like a fancy knife. Looks good hanging on the wall. He paused, let the silence stretch. But when you need to actually cut something, you want a blade that works. Something with a good edge. Balance, weight. Something you can depend on when it matters. He went back to the accounts. I'll take dependable over decorative every time. Rose's face went white, then red, then white again, the color draining away like water down a gully. She stood abruptly, murmured something about a headache that nobody believed, and fled to her room. The door didn't quite slam, but it closed hard enough to make the point. Catherine excused herself quickly after probably to deal with Rose's tantrum, probably to try and salvage something from the wreckage of her plans. Emma and Cole were left alone in the firelit room. Just the two of them, and the crackling wood, and the mountain night pressing against the walls. You didn't have to do that, Emma spoke quietly, not looking at him. Do what? Defend me. Wasn't defending, was stating fact. He closed the account book. Your mother's deep in debt. Post won't last another winter without a miracle. Emma wasn't surprised. She'd seen the signs, the empty shelves, the desperate calculations, the way Catherine's face had gone tight and gray with worry that never left. I know. She was counting on Rose to marry well. I know that too. Emma met his eyes across the table. And now she's got you marrying me instead. And she's wondering if she made a mistake letting it happen. Did she? Won't know until we try. He stood, moved closer. They were alone properly, alone for the first time. The fire crackled. Outside, a coyote yipped in the distance, its cry sharp and lonely in the dark. Emma. Her name in his mouth sounded different, substantial, like it meant something. I need you to understand something. What? This thing between us, whatever it is, it's not what you probably dreamed about as a girl. It won't be poetry and flowers and sweet words. I stopped dreaming about those things a long time ago, Cole. But it'll be real. He took another step closer. I swear that to you. It'll be real. She nodded, her throat felt tight. That's enough. Real is enough. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused, warm, strong. He held her hand carefully like it was something valuable, like it mattered. Neither of them spoke. They just stood there in the firelight holding hands, and it felt like a promise neither knew quite how to name. The fire popped. The wind moved against the windows. Somewhere in the building, Rose was crying or raging or both. But in this room, in this moment, there was only the two of them, and the warmth of skin against skin, and the understanding that they were choosing each other choosing to build something from nothing and see what held. When Cole finally left, riding out into the dark with only starlight to guide him, Emma stood on the porch and watched until she couldn't see him anymore. Her hand still felt warm where he'd held it. The red ribbon was tied around her wrist, bright against her skin, even in the dim light from the doorway. Behind her, she heard Catherine moving in the post. Her mother didn't come out, didn't say anything. Just let Emma stand there in the cold spring night, watching the space where Cole Bennett had disappeared, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in the world, and she couldn't go back even if she wanted to. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Cole came by almost daily now, the courting period taking on a shape and weight. He brought news from Fort Benton, tensions with the Blackfoot to the north, a new trail opening up toward the Bitterroots, rumors of gold strikes that would bring floods of people and change everything. He also brought more practical things. Salt, which they were running low on, a bolt of calico cloth Catherine couldn't afford but needed, small game he'd trapped, rabbits and grouse contributions to the pot that kept them fed. Emma noticed he never brought these things directly to Catherine, always left them where Emma would find them, like he understood the delicate politics of charity, making it look like Emma had provided, not him, letting her maintain dignity in her mother's eyes. One afternoon, he showed up with an antelope carcass slung over his pack horse, already gutted and cleaned, ready for butchering. Emma was out back working on the woodpile, swinging the axe with steady practice of the strokes. Her bad leg was aching, had been all morning, the old injury complaining about the damp spring weather. But the wood needed splitting, and nobody else would do it. Cole dismounted, tied both horses, and watched her for a moment. She could feel his eyes on her, but didn't stop working. Didn't want him to think she couldn't handle it. Didn't want to seem weak. After 3 more logs, he spoke. Show me how you do that. She paused, confused. Split wood. The stance, you're favoring the left side, compensating for the leg. She flushed, embarrassed that he'd noticed the hitch in her movements. Works well enough. Didn't say it didn't work. Said show me. So she did. Demonstrated how she'd learned to shift her weight, use her good leg for power, and let the bad one just provide balance. It wasn't pretty, but it got the job done. He nodded, taking it in. Then he picked up the axe. Try this. He showed her a different stance, one that put even less strain on the bad leg. More weight on the upper body using gravity, and the axe's momentum instead of pure leg drive. He split 3 logs to demonstrate the movement's fluid and efficient, then handed her back the axe. She tried it his way. It felt awkward at first, unfamiliar, but after a few strokes she felt the difference. Less pain in the leg, more power in the cut. Better? His voice was close behind her. Not touching, but near enough that she could feel his presence like heat from a fire. Better. Good. He moved away, started unloading the antelope. Where you want this? They spent the next 2 hours butchering the animal together. Emma knew her way around a carcass, but Cole knew tricks she didn't. How to separate the backstrap without wasting meat. How to save the hide so it could be tanned properly. How to crack the bones to get at the marrow, which made the best soup. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional instructions or questions. When they were done, the meat was hanging in the smokehouse, the hide was scraped and salted, the bones were set aside for soup stock, and Emma's hands were stained red up to the wrists. Cole went to the water barrel, washed his hands, then held out the dipper to her. She drank, and the water was cold and clean and tasted like snowmelt from the high peaks. You're good at this. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Had to be. Nobody else was going to do it. That's not what I mean. He leaned against the smokehouse wall, looking at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. You're good at surviving, at making do, at taking what you have and making it enough. Didn't have much choice. Always a choice. Some people break. You didn't. The words settled over her like a benediction, validation she hadn't known she needed. Her whole life being useful had been the consolation prize, the thing you became when you couldn't be beautiful or charming or wanted. But Cole made it sound like something else, like strength, like virtue. Thank you. Her voice came out rough. For what? For seeing that. He nodded, pushed off from the wall. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand again, or touch her shoulder, or make some gesture of connection. But he just picked up his hat, settled it on his head, and moved toward his horse. 3 more days. She blinked. What? 3 more days, and I figure we'll know if this suits, if we suit. He swung into the saddle. Think on it, make sure, because after that, if you say yes, I'll want to make it permanent. Then he rode off, leaving her standing by the smokehouse with blood under her fingernails and hope beating wild in her chest. The next 3 days crawled by like wounded animals. Rose stopped speaking to Emma entirely. Would leave a room when Emma entered. Would eat meals in stony silence, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Catherine tried to smooth things over, tried to convince Rose that maybe Emma marrying well would help save the post, would help all of them. But Rose wasn't interested in logic. She was interested in what she'd always been interested in, being chosen, being wanted, being the center of every man's attention. Emma had taken that from her, had stolen the one man who'd come looking for a wife and had the means to be worth marrying. It didn't matter that Cole had never wanted Rose. It didn't matter that Emma hadn't done anything to attract him. All that mattered to Rose was that for once the plain sister had won and she couldn't stand it. Dawn running watched it all with knowing eyes. One morning while Emma was helping her wash clothes in the big tub out back, the older woman spoke. Your sister has spent her whole life being the sun. Now you are the sun, and she does not know how to be the moon. Emma scrubbed the shirt against the washboard, working out the stains. I never wanted to be the sun. No, which is why you deserve to be. Dawn running wrung out a sheet, her strong hands twisting the water free. The man sees you, really sees. That is rare. Do not let your sister's anger make you doubt what you have. I don't know what I have. You have a man who chose you when he could have chosen anyone, who looked past beauty to find something deeper. That is everything. She hung the sheet on the line, smoothing it with careful hands. Your sister will survive. She always has. Pretty women always do. But you have survived without being pretty. That takes a different kind of strength. He recognizes that strength. He needs it. The words stayed with Emma through the rest of the day, into the evening, into the next morning. She turned them over and over, examining them from every angle, trying to believe they were true. Cole came by on the second day. Didn't stay long. Just brought coffee beans, real ones, a whole pound in a cloth sack. Handed them to Emma without ceremony. So you don't run out. Then he left, and Emma stood holding the coffee like it was gold, like it was proof that someone was thinking about her, planning for her, making sure she had what she needed. The third day arrived bright and clear, the kind of spring day that made you believe winter was truly over, that warmth and growth were possible, that things could change for the better. Emma woke early, washed carefully, braided her hair and pinned it up neat, wore her second best dress, the gray wool that was patched but clean. She didn't know what to expect. Didn't know if Cole would ask her today or wait. Didn't know what she'd say when he did. Except she did know. She'd known since the first day when he'd looked at her and said, "Because you're real." She'd known since the gifts started appearing. She'd known since he'd held her hand by the firelight and promised her something real. She'd say yes. He arrived mid-morning riding the buckskin at an easy pace. But this time there was something different about him. A tension in his shoulders, a set to his jaw. He dismounted, tied the horse, and came straight to where Emma was sweeping the porch. "Walk with me." Not a question. She set down the broom and followed him past the post, past the outbuildings, down to the creek where they'd had their first real conversation. The water was lower now, the spring melt starting to ease. The banks were green with new grass. He stood looking at the water for a long moment. Emma waited. She'd learned that Cole Bennett didn't rush his words. When he spoke, it was because he'd thought it through and decided it was worth saying. Finally, Preacher came through Fort Benton yesterday. Circuit rider named Stone. He's headed this way, passing through on his way to settlements further west. Should be here by tomorrow, maybe next day. Emma's breath caught. She understood what he was saying, what he was asking without asking. "I see. We could marry when he comes through. Simple ceremony. Then you'd come with me up to my place and we'd start this life we've been talking about." He turned to face her. "Or we could wait, keep courting, give it more time, make sure." "Do you need more time?" "No." The word was absolute, certain, like a door closing or a foundation settling. "Do you?" Emma looked at him, really looked. At the weathered face and the dark eyes and the hands that could butcher an antelope, or mend a shirt or hold hers carefully in the firelight. At the man who'd chosen her when he could have chosen anyone. Who'd looked past the birthmark and the limp and the plainness to see something worth keeping. "No, I don't need more time." "Then when Stone gets here, we marry." "Yes." Something shifted in his expression. Relief maybe, or satisfaction, or something deeper that he'd never put into words. "All right then." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in cloth, handed it to her. She unwrapped it carefully. A ring, simple silver band unadorned. The kind of ring you could wear while working and not worry about losing. Practical. Perfect. "Belonged to my mother, only thing I have from her." Emma's throat went tight. She looked up at him, this man she barely knew, and was about to bind her life to, and saw vulnerability in his eyes for the first time. This mattered to him. She mattered to him. More than he was willing to say out loud, but the ring said it for him. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will." He took it back from her just for a moment and slipped it onto her left hand. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They stood by the creek, her hand in his, the ring catching the sunlight. And for the first time since this strange courtship had begun, Cole Bennett smiled. Really smiled. The expression transformed his face, softened the hard angles, and Emma felt something in her chest crack open like ice in spring. 2 days later, Reverend Stone arrived at the trading post. He was a circuit rider, lean as a whip and weathered as old leather, with a Bible held together by faith and rawhide laces. He traveled alone, carrying the word to settlements and trading posts and mining camps scattered across hundreds of miles of wilderness. He'd been doing it for 20 years, and it showed in every line of his face, every callus on his hands. He arrived around noon, his horse tired, looking for a meal and a place to sleep before pushing on. Catherine fed him stew and cornbread, and Emma saw her mother's eyes calculating, saw her realize what was about to happen. Cole arrived an hour later, rode in with purpose, dismounted, and spoke to Reverend Stone directly. "I'd like you to perform a marriage, today if you're willing." Stone looked from Cole to Emma, who'd come out of the post when she heard voices, her heart suddenly racing. "Today? You'll be gone tomorrow. Won't be another preacher through for months." Stone studied them both. Emma could see him taking in the age difference, her limp, the practical clothes, the absence of flowers or fancy dress, or any of the trappings usually associated with weddings. But he'd been on the frontier long enough to understand how things worked out here. Romance was a luxury. Survival was necessity. The young lady is willing, Emma stepped forward. I am. And you're of age, not coerced. I'm 27 and nobody's forcing me. Stone nodded slowly. Then I'll do it. God's work doesn't wait for perfect circumstances. He looked at Catherine. Ma'am, you have objections? Catherine opened her mouth, closed it. Emma could see the calculations running behind her eyes, the debts, the failing post, the fact that Cole Bennett was solid and established and might help them survive the coming winter, even if it was Emma marrying him instead of Rose. No objections. Then we'll have a wedding. It happened fast, too fast for Emma to think, which was probably for the best. If she'd thought too hard, she might have panicked, might have realized what she was doing, binding her life to a man she'd known for 3 weeks, leaving everything familiar, heading up into the high country, where one mistake could kill you and loneliness could drive you mad. But she didn't think. She just moved. Catherine helped her change into her best dress, the dark blue wool that was usually saved for Sundays, helped her rebraid her hair and pin it up proper. No veil, no flowers, no pretense. Just Emma Hartwell about to become Emma Bennett. Rose refused to come out of her room. Catherine begged, pleaded, but the door stayed locked, and finally Catherine gave up. Let her elder daughter sulk. She had a wedding to witness. They gathered under the cottonwood tree where Cole had first asked to court Emma. Just the 5 of them, McCole Reverend and Stone Catherine, and Dawn Running, who'd come without invitation, but whose presence felt right somehow. A witness to something she seemed to understand better than any of them. Stone opened his worn Bible. The pages were thin as onion skin, covered in notes and underlining evidence of 20 years' hard use. Dearly beloved, we are gathered in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The familiar words rolled over Emma like water. She heard them but didn't really listen. She was too aware of Cole standing beside her, solid and real, his presence changing everything. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. The afternoon sun filtered through the cottonwood leaves, making patterns of light and shadow on the ground. A hawk called from somewhere high above. The world kept turning. Do you, Cole Bennett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part? Cole's voice was steady, no hesitation. I do. And do you, Emma Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part? Emma looked at Cole, really looked. His dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw no love, no passion, but something maybe more valuable than certainty, decision choice. He had chosen her knowing full well what he was getting. No illusions, no fantasies, just her exactly as she was. I do. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Clear, sure. By the power vested in me by God in the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you man and wife. Stone looked at Cole. You may kiss your bride. Cole hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then he leaned down, his hand coming up to cup her jaw with surprising gentleness, and kissed her. It was brief, almost formal, but his lips were warm, and his hand on her face was careful, like she was something that mattered. When he pulled back, something in his eyes had shifted, softened maybe, or opened. They signed the record book. Cole's signature bold and clear, Emma's smaller but equally steady. Catherine hugged Emma, briefly whispered, "Make him happy," in her ear, which was as close to a blessing as she was going to get. Dawn Running smiled and squeezed Emma's hand. You will do well, both of you. Then it was done. Emma Hartwell was now Emma Bennett, wife to a mountain man bound to a life she could barely imagine, and a man she barely knew. The enormity of it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt oddly calm, like she'd been holding her breath for 27 years and could finally exhale. Cole brought the pack horse around, already loaded with Emma's belongings. She didn't have much to show for a life. A trunk with her clothes, her books, her herbs, some cooking implements, her father's medical texts. Not enough to fill even one horse, really. Her whole life packed up and ready to move in less than an hour. He helped her mount the paint mare he'd brought for her. His hand steadied her when her bad leg made mounting awkward. He didn't comment on the weakness, just helped matter-of-factly, then swung onto his buckskin. They rode north, leaving the trading post behind. Catherine stood on the porch watching them go. Dawn Running raised one hand in farewell. The post itself sagged and tired, already fading into memory. Emma didn't look back. There was nothing there for her anymore. Whatever future she had was ahead up in the mountains with the man riding beside her who'd promised her something real. The trail climbed steadily, following creek beds and game trails, moving from valley into higher country. The pines grew thicker, the air cooler and cleaner. Cole led, she followed, and they didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. They both knew what this was: a practical arrangement, a partnership for survival. Not romance, but something maybe more durable. They rode for 4 hours, climbing higher with each mile. The mountains closed in around them, massive and indifferent. Emma had never been this far from the post, this deep into wild country. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. No roads, no neighbors, just wilderness stretching in every direction, and somewhere in that wilderness, a one-room cabin that was now supposed to be home. The sun was starting its descent toward the western peaks when they came around a bend in the trail, and there it was. A high meadow, maybe 6 acres of grass surrounded by dense timber. A creek ran clear and cold along one edge, the water singing over smooth stones. The cabin sat in the center, backed against the trees for wind protection. Small, rougher than Emma had expected, but solid. Maybe 14 feet by 16, built from squared logs chinked tight with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, already smoking. The roof was shake shingles, weathered but intact. One real glass window, a luxury this far out, and a door made of thick planks. A covered porch across the front, just deep enough to keep the rain off. Behind the cabin, a lean-to for the horses, a small smokehouse, a root cellar dug into the hillside. Furs hung stretched on frames, drying in the mountain air. Tools hung neat on wall pegs under the porch roof. Everything in its place. Everything organized. The home of a man who lived alone and liked order. Emma took it all in. This was it. This was home now. No going back. It's not much. Cole's first words in an hour. It's more than I expected. She answered honestly. She'd half imagined a canvas tent or a lean-to. This was a real home, rough, but solid. A place that could keep you alive through a Montana winter. He dismounted, helped her down. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment, then he released her and started unpacking. I'll show you around. Get you settled. The inside was dim until he lit a lamp. Then it emerged from shadow. One room like he'd said, but well organized. A bed built into one corner, wide enough for 2, covered with buffalo robes and wool blankets. A table and 2 chairs near the fireplace. Shelves on the walls holding supplies, tools, books. A trunk, some pegs for hanging clothes. The fireplace with a good crane for hanging pots. Clean, spare, masculine. But the fire was already laid and burning, which meant he'd ridden up ahead of her at some point to prepare. That's the bed. He stated the obvious because they were both thinking about it. About the fact that they were married now and this was their wedding night, and the bed was right there. We can sleep in the... No, Emma interrupted him, her voice firm. We're married. This is a small cabin. It'll be cold come winter. Sharing a bed is practical. Nothing more. He studied her face, looking for something. Whatever it was, he must have found it because he nodded. All right, if you're comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with being practical. The corner of his mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. I'm noticing that about you. They settled into an awkward routine for the rest of that first evening. He showed her where everything was, how the cabin was organized, what needed doing. She unpacked her things, finding places for her belongings in this space that was now hers. They moved around each other carefully, like 2 animals sharing territory for the first time. Wary, but not hostile. She made supper from the supplies he had. Venison stew because it seemed safe and she knew how to make it well. Cornbread, coffee. They ate in near silence, both exhausted from the day, from the changes, from the weight of what they'd done. When full dark came, they faced the inevitable. The bed. Cole banked the fire while Emma changed into her nightdress behind a blanket he'd hung for privacy. Then she climbed into bed, staying far to one side, leaving him plenty of room. The buffalo robes were soft, the blankets warm. The bed itself was comfortable, better than what she'd had at the post. She heard him moving in the darkness, the rustle of clothes being removed. Then the bed shifted as he climbed in on the far side. They lay there, a careful foot of space between them both, rigid as fence posts, staring up at the dark rafters. The silence stretched. Outside, a wolf howled from somewhere close, its cry rising and falling like a question with no answer. Another wolf answered from further away. Emma had heard wolves before, but never this close, never while lying in a strange bed, in a strange place with a man who was her husband, but also a stranger. Emma, his voice in the darkness. Yes. Thank you. For what? For saying yes, for coming here, for not making this harder than it has to be. She thought about that, about all the ways this could have gone wrong, about Rose's rage and Catherine's disappointment and the fact that she was 27, and this was her first and probably only chance at something that looked like a normal life. You're welcome, and thank you. For what? For choosing me. I know it doesn't make sense to most people, but it makes sense to me. Makes sense to me too. They lay there in the darkness, listening to the night sounds, the creek murmuring, the wind in the pines, an owl calling from somewhere close. Slowly and perceptibly, they both relaxed. The space between them stayed, but it didn't feel as vast, and eventually exhausted from the long day they both slept. Emma woke once in the deep night. The fire had burned down to coals barely glowing. She could hear Cole's breathing slow and steady. At some point in sleep, they'd both shifted closer to the center of the bed. Not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. It was oddly comforting not being alone in the darkness. She lay there for a few minutes, then drifted back to sleep. And if by morning they'd shifted even closer, neither of them mentioned it. Days fell into rhythm faster than Emma expected. Cole was up before dawn checking his trap lines, or hunting, or doing the 100 tasks of mountain living. She woke when he did make coffee, while he built up the fire, prepared something for him to eat. They'd have breakfast together, not talking much. Then he'd head out. While he was gone, Emma worked. There was always work. She organized the cabin to her liking, rearranging things slightly to make them more efficient. She tended the small garden plot he'd carved out of the meadow, coaxing vegetables from the short growing season. She hung herbs to dry mended clothes, kept the fire going, prepared meals. It was hard work, constant work, but it was hers in a way nothing had been before. And she was good at it. Better than Cole expected, she could tell. He'd come back from a day on the trap lines to find his torn shirt mended so skillfully you couldn't see where the rip had been. Or his coffee, already made exactly the way he liked it. Or the evening meal ready and waiting, something more elaborate than the simple fare he'd been making for himself for years. He didn't say much, but she'd catch him looking at her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or reassessment, like he was realizing he'd gotten more than he bargained for. The physical distance between them stayed constant for the first 2 weeks. Polite, respectful, careful. They shared the bed but didn't touch. Worked side by side but didn't linger. It was like they were both waiting for something, though neither could have said what. One morning, maybe 10 days after the wedding, Emma woke to find Cole already up and dressed, standing by the window. Something in his posture was different. Tense. What is it? She sat up, pushing hair out of her face. Storm coming. Big one. She moved to the window, looked out. The sky to the west was dark bruised purple and black clouds boiling over the peaks. The air had that electric feel, that sense of pressure building. How long? Maybe 2 hours, maybe less. His voice was clipped, efficient. Need to get the horses in, secure everything, make sure we've got enough wood. They worked fast. Emma had learned in her years at the trading post how to read weather, how to prepare for a blow. But this was different. This high-up storms were meaner. The wind could rip a roof off if it wasn't secured properly. The cold could drop 30 degrees in an hour. You could die if you weren't ready. She helped him lead the horses into the lean-to, making sure they had feed and water. Helped him stack extra wood on the porch under cover. Brought in everything that might blow away. Checked the chimney, made sure it was drawing properly. Filled every container they had with water from the creek, because once the storm hit, they wouldn't be going out. By the time they were done, the wind was picking up. The pines were starting to sway. The temperature was dropping fast, that bone-deep cold that promised snow, even though it was only May. They got inside just as the first fat drops started to fall. Within minutes, it was a deluge. Rain hammered the roof like fists. The wind screamed around the cabin, finding every crack, every weakness. Lightning flashed so close the thunder was instantaneous, rattling the windows. Emma had seen storms before, but nothing like this. The violence of it was stunning. The cabin shook. The fire in the fireplace guttered and smoked as wind came down the chimney. Cole moved around the room, checking the shutters, making sure nothing was leaking, adjusting the fire to keep it drawing. Then the rain turned to hail. Chunks of ice the size of walnuts hammering down. The noise was deafening. Emma found herself moving closer to Cole without thinking about it, some primal instinct seeking safety near another human in the face of nature's fury. He didn't move away, just stood there solid and calm, like the storm was nothing he hadn't seen before, which it probably wasn't. The hail lasted maybe 20 minutes. Then it shifted back to rain, then to sleet, then to snow. Big, wet flakes that came down thick and fast. By noon, there were 3 inches on the ground. By evening, there were 8. A late spring storm, the kind that reminded you that winter never really left this high up, just took occasional naps. They were trapped inside. Couldn't go out. Couldn't check the horses. Couldn't do anything but wait. Emma cooked. Made stew from dried meat and root vegetables. Made biscuits in the Dutch oven. Made coffee strong and bitter, the way Cole liked it. They ate by lamplight while outside the storm raged. After supper, Cole pulled out a deck of cards, taught her to play poker. She picked it up fast, and within an hour she was winning more hands than she lost. He raised an eyebrow when she took another pot with a flush. "You sure you never played before?" "Never, but I'm good with patterns, probabilities." "That you are." He dealt another hand. They played until the lamp oil ran low. Then they banked the fire and went to bed, the storm still howling outside. The cabin was cold despite the fire, and without discussing it, they moved closer together in the bed. Still not touching, but sharing warmth. Practical. Emma lay there listening to the wind and the man breathing beside her, and thought about how strange her life had become. 2 weeks ago, she was the spinster daughter at a failing trading post. Now she was a wife living in a one-room cabin in the high country, trapped by a storm with a man she barely knew. And somehow, impossibly, she was happy. The storm lasted 3 days. By the second day, they had run out of things to keep them busy. The cabin was clean, the clothes were mended, the food was prepared. There was nothing to do but sit and wait and try not to get on each other's nerves. That's when Emma discovered Cole's books. She'd noticed them before, of course. A shelf of them, maybe 15 volumes. But she hadn't looked closely. Now trapped inside, she pulled one down. Shakespeare, The Tempest. She opened it, saw notes in the margins, passages underlined. Evidence of careful reading. "You read Shakespeare?" Cole looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Some. Got them from a trader years back. Needed something to fill the winter nights." She pulled down another book. Homer, The Odyssey. More notes, more underlining. "You're educated." "Had schooling. Back in Pennsylvania. Before I came west." He tested the knife edge against his thumb. "Surprised?" "A little. People usually are. Think because a man lives in the mountains and trapped beaver, he must be ignorant." There was no bitterness in his voice, just statement of fact. "I think people make a lot of assumptions." Emma sat down with the book. "May I?" "They're your books now, too." So she read. And as she read, he worked on his gear, and they existed in comfortable silence, the storm raging outside the cabin, warm and safe inside. It was the most peaceful Emma had felt in years, maybe ever. That evening, as they were preparing for bed, Emma noticed Cole moving differently, favoring his left side. She watched him for a moment and then spoke. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "Let me see." "Emma, Cole, let me see." He sighed, pulled off his shirt. There was a bruise on his ribs, deep purple and black, spreading across his left side like spilled ink. Emma sucked in a breath. "What happened?" "Horse kicked me 3 days ago before the storm. Was checking his hoof and he spooked." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Wasn't important." A bruise like that could mean broken ribs, punctured lung, That's not unimportant. She moved closer, carefully examining the injury. Her hands were gentle but firm, probing the ribs, checking for breaks. Cole winced but didn't pull away. Breathe deep. He did. No crackling sound, no indication of lung damage. I think you're lucky. Bruised but not broken. But you need to take it easy. No heavy lifting for a week. Can't do that. Got trap lines to check soon as this storm breaks. Then you do it carefully. And you tell me when you're hurt. Understand? She looked up at him, and their faces were close. Closer than they'd been since the wedding kiss. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Could smell pine and wood smoke on his skin. Could feel the warmth radiating from him. For a moment, neither moved. Something hung in the air between them, unspoken and unnamed. Then Cole stepped back carefully and pulled his shirt back on. I'll tell you next time. Good. Emma's hands were trembling slightly. She clasped them together to still them. That night in bed, the space between them was smaller. Not gone, but smaller. And when Cole's breathing went deep and even with sleep, Emma lay awake for a long time, staring at the rafters, trying to understand what was happening between them. Trying to understand why a bruise on his ribs had made her heart race. Why the closeness of his face had made her breath catch. Why she was starting to care whether he was hurt or safe or happy. This wasn't the plan. The plan was practical. Partnership. Respect. Not this. Not feelings. But feelings didn't care about plans. The storm finally broke on the morning of the fourth day. Emma woke to sunlight streaming through the window, bright and almost painful after days of gray. She got up, looked outside, and caught her breath. The world had been transformed. Everything was white, covered in a foot of heavy, wet snow. The pines sagged under the weight. The meadow was a blank canvas. The creek still ran, dark water cutting through white banks, but everything else was silent and pristine. Cole came up behind her close enough that she could feel his presence. Beautiful, isn't it? Yes. They stood there for a moment, looking out at the transformed world. Then Cole moved away, started pulling on his boots. Need to check the horses, check for damage, see if any trees came down. I'll help. They went out together into the snow. It was cold, that sharp, clean cold that makes your lungs ache. But the sun was bright and the sky was blue and the world felt new somehow. Like the storm had washed everything clean and they could start over. The horses were fine, the cabin had held. One branch had come down near the lean-to, but it hadn't hit anything important. They spent the morning clearing snow, checking trap lines, making sure everything was secure. Working together in the snow, Emma felt something shift. They moved in sync, anticipating each other's needs, working efficiently without needing to talk. It felt like dancing, if dancing involved shoveling snow and clearing branches. It felt like partnership. That afternoon, Cole took her up to a ridge above the cabin, showed her the lay of the land, pointed out landmarks where his trap lines ran, where the good hunting was, where the creek sources were, where to go if she ever needed to find him, where never to go because it was too dangerous. You need to know this, in case something happens to me. In case you need to survive alone. Emma looked at him, startled. Nothing's going to happen to you. Maybe not, but maybe. This is dangerous country, and you need to be able to take care of yourself. So she learned, memorized the landmarks, the shape of the peaks, the flow of the water, the trails. She learned because he was right, because survival out here meant knowing the land, because she needed to be able to stand on her own if she had to. But standing there on that ridge, looking out over miles of wilderness, Emma realized she didn't want to be alone. She wanted this man, this place, this life they were building together. The realization terrified her. The days turned into weeks. May became June. The snow melted fast under hot sun. The meadow burst into wildflowers, carpets of blue and yellow and red. The garden started to grow. The world warmed. And with the warming, Emma and Cole grew closer. Not romantically, they hadn't crossed that line yet, but something deeper. Something built on shared work and mutual respect in the slow accumulation of small kindnesses. He'd bring her flowers sometimes, wild lupine or Indian paintbrush, just set them on the table without comment. She'd find them and smile and put them in a jar of water. She'd make his favorite foods. Learn that he liked his biscuits with honey, that he'd eat venison 7 days a week and never complain, but he lit up when she managed to make chicken, which was rare this far from settlements. They'd sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset behind the peaks. Sometimes they'd talk. Sometimes they wouldn't. Both were good. One evening, maybe 6 weeks after the wedding, they were sitting in comfortable silence when Cole spoke. "You're different than I expected." Emma looked at him. "How so?" "Stronger, tougher, more capable." He paused. "Smarter, funnier, better company." She felt warmth spread through her chest. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd do the work, keep the cabin, not complain. That was all I needed." He turned to look at her. "But you're more than that. You make this place feel like home, not just shelter." Emma didn't know what to say. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. The plain sister, the useful one. Making a place feel like home was the best compliment anyone could have given her. "Thank you." Her voice came out rough. "I mean it. Having you here, it's good. Better than good." He reached over and took her hand. Just held it, his calloused palm warm against hers. They sat like that, watching the sunset, holding hands, and Emma felt something in her chest expand and crack open like spring ice. She was falling in love with her husband. The thought should have scared her, should have sent her running. But it didn't. It just felt true. Like gravity. Like water running downhill. Inevitable. But she kept it to herself, because Cole had been clear. He couldn't offer love. He'd given it once and it had nearly killed him. And Emma wasn't about to push for something he couldn't give. What they had was good. Real. Maybe that was enough. July came hot and bright. The garden was producing. The root cellar was filling with preserved meat and vegetables. The trap lines were yielding less as beaver moved to higher elevations for summer. But there was other work. Building a new storage shed, improving the smokehouse, gathering and stockpiling wood for the coming winter. Emma learned to shoot better. Cole would set up targets in the meadow and teach her patient and methodical, correcting her stance, teaching her to breathe, to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. She got better fast, and soon she could hit a target at 50 yards more often than not. "Why do I need to learn this?" she asked after a particularly good shooting session. "Because I'm not always here. And bears don't care that you're a woman. Mountain lions don't care. Men sometimes don't care. You need to be able to protect yourself." So she learned to load and clean the rifle, learned to carry it properly, learned to shoot without flinching. And she was grateful for it one afternoon when Cole was gone and a black bear came snuffling around the cabin looking for food. Emma stood on the porch with the rifle, her heart hammering, and fired a shot into the air. The bear startled and ran. She fired another shot to make sure it kept going. Then she stood there shaking with adrenaline, realizing she'd just protected herself, protected their home, without Cole, on her own. When he came back that evening and she told him what happened, he looked at her with something like pride. "You did good." "I was terrified." "Terrified and did it anyway. That's courage." He put his hand on her shoulder and the touch sent electricity through her. "I'm proud of you." 4 words, but they meant everything. No one had ever been proud of her before. She was just Emma, the useful one, the one who did what needed doing. But Cole was proud of her, and it mattered more than she wanted to admit. That night, they lay in bed closer than ever before. Still not touching, but the space between them was measured in inches now, not feet. Emma could feel the heat of his body, could hear every breath, could smell pine and leather and something uniquely him. She wanted to close that final distance, wanted to reach out and touch him, wanted to see if this thing building between them was real or just her imagination. But she held back, because he'd been clear, because pushing for more might break what they had, because sometimes wanting something wasn't enough reason to take it. But it was getting harder. Every day, it was getting harder to maintain that distance, to pretend that what they had was purely practical, to ignore the fact that somewhere along the way, this arrangement had turned into something else. And she suspected Cole felt it too, saw it in the way he looked at her sometimes, in the way his hand would linger when he helped her with something, in the way he'd find excuses to be near her. But he didn't say anything, and neither did she, and the tension built like summer heat, oppressive and inescapable. August arrived with thunderstorms that rolled through every afternoon. Emma loved watching them come, the way the clouds would build over the peaks, towering structures of white and gray that turned black and violent as they moved across the valley. The lightning was spectacular, this high-up brilliant forks that seemed close enough to touch. One afternoon, a storm hit harder than usual. Emma was in the cabin, Cole was out checking the horses. She heard him shout, heard something crash, and ran to the door. He was on the ground near the lean-to, not moving. A branch had come down heavy with rain and caught him across the shoulders. Emma's heart stopped. She ran across the yard, heedless of the lightning, the rain, the danger. Cole. She reached him, saw him trying to push himself up. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead where the branch had caught him. His face was pale. I'm all right. You're bleeding. Can you stand? Together they got him to his feet. He was unsteady, leaning on her heavily as they made their way back to the cabin. Once inside, she sat him down and examined the damage. The cut on his forehead wasn't deep, but it was bleeding freely. His shoulder was going to bruise, might even be dislocated. Emma moved into action. This was what she knew. This was what she'd trained for, reading those medical texts, learning from Dawn running. She cleaned the cut with water she'd boiled and cooled, bandaged it carefully, checked his shoulder, felt the joint. Not dislocated, but badly bruised. You'll be sore for a week, but nothing's broken. Cole looked at her, really looked. And there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. You're good at this, taking care of people. Had practice. Father was always getting hurt doing stupid things. Someone had to patch him up. Still, you're good at it. She helped him out of his wet shirt, her hands gentle on his bruised shoulder. He winced but didn't pull away. Their faces were close again, like that night after the first storm. Emma could see every detail of his face. The scar above his eyebrow, the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into sun and wind. Emma, her name in his mouth rough and quiet. Yes, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. She waited. This thing between us, it's not what I planned, not what I wanted. The words should have hurt, but something in his voice, in his eyes, told her to wait. I told you I couldn't give you love, that it wasn't in me anymore. I know. I was wrong. The world stopped. Emma couldn't breathe. What? I was wrong. It is in me. You put it there. Or maybe it was always there, and you just found it. I don't know. But I know that somewhere between that first day and now you stopped being convenient and started being necessary. He reached up with his good hand and cupped her face. I don't know when it happened. Don't know how. But it did. And I can't pretend anymore that this is just practical. That you're just my wife in name, because you're not. You're everything I didn't know I needed. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She'd waited her whole life to hear words like that. To be seen, to be chosen, to matter. I love you. His voice was rough with emotion. I didn't want to, tried not to, but I do, and I needed you to know. She leaned forward and kissed him. Really kissed him, not the brief, formal kiss from their wedding, but something deep and real and full of everything she'd been holding back for weeks. He kissed her back, his hand sliding into her hair, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Emma rested her forehead against his. I love you too. Have for weeks. Was afraid to say it. Why? Because you said you couldn't give me that, and I didn't want to lose what we had by asking for more. He laughed, actually laughed, the sound warm and real. We're a pair, aren't we? Both too scared to say what we feel. Practical. Stupid. That too. They stayed like that for a mighty moment, holding each other, the storm raging outside. Then Cole stood, wincing slightly at the pain in his shoulder, and took her hand. Come here. He led her to the bed. Emma's heart raced, understanding what he was offering, what they were about to cross over to. But she wasn't afraid. She'd never been less afraid in her life. They lay down together, and this time there was no distance between them. No careful space. Just two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and decided to keep each other. Just a man and a woman learning how to love when neither had expected to. Just Emma and Cole finally completely together. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire burned warm. And in the bed, Emma Bennett finally understood what it meant to be wanted. Not for what she could do or how useful she was, but for who she was. Herself, all of herself. Even the parts she'd always thought were too broken to love. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Emma had ever known. Not just the physical intimacy, though, that was revelation enough, but the way Cole looked at her now, the way he touched her in passing small gestures that said, "You're mine and I'm yours." The way they moved through days as a single unit, anticipating each other's needs without words. They talked more. At night, lying in bed with his arm around her, Cole would tell her things he'd never told anyone. About his childhood in Pennsylvania. About the woman who'd left him. About the years he'd spent alone in the mountains building walls around his heart, because it was easier than risking that kind of pain again. "I thought I was done," he said one night, his voice low in the darkness. "Thought I'd live up here alone until I got too old or too careless and the mountains took me. Seemed like a decent enough way to go." Emma traced patterns on his chest with her finger. "What changed? Saw you that day at your mother's post, working, limping, not expecting anything, and something in me recognized something in you." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "We were both alone, both convinced we didn't deserve better. Both wrong." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She'd spent 27 years being invisible, and now she was so thoroughly seen it almost hurt. "I'm glad you chose me. Best decision I ever made." And by late August, the garden was producing more than they could eat fresh. Emma spent long days preserving everything. Canning vegetables, drying herbs, smoking meat, laying in stores for winter. Cole helped when he could, but he was busy too, getting in the last of the season's pelts, making sure they had enough firewood, hunting to fill the smokehouse. They worked from dawn until dark most days, but the work felt different now. Felt like building something together instead of just surviving. Felt like making a life instead of just getting through. One morning in early September, Emma woke feeling strange, queasy, off balance. She made it outside before she vomited, retching into the bushes behind the cabin. Cole found her there, his face creased with concern. "You all right?" "I think so. Must have eaten something bad." But the next morning it happened again. And the morning after that. By the fourth day, Emma knew. She'd seen this enough times with women at the trading post. The morning sickness, the exhaustion, the way certain smells suddenly made her stomach turn. She was pregnant. The realization terrified her. She thought about the rattlesnake bite when she was 9, the fever afterward, the way her leg had withered. The doctors had said things, medical words she didn't fully understand, but that added up to one terrible possibility. She might not be able to carry a child to term, might not be able to have children at all. That's what Rose had thrown at her the day Cole asked to court her. The poison wrapped in concern. And Emma had believed it because, why wouldn't she? Every other part of her body had failed in some way. Why would this be different? But here she was, pregnant, which meant either the doctors were wrong or she was the exception or she'd just been lucky so far. She didn't know which scared her more. She waited 3 days before telling Cole. Wanted to be sure. Wanted to work through her own fear before adding his to it. But on the third night, as they lay in bed, she finally spoke. "Cole, I need to tell you something." She felt him tense beside her. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." Silence, long enough that Emma's heart started to sink. Then he sat up, turned to look at her in the dim light from the banked fire. "You're sure?" "Yes." His face was unreadable. Emma felt panic rising in her chest. This wasn't what they'd planned. They'd barely been married 3 months. They were still learning each other. A child was supposed to come later when they were ready, when she'd proven herself capable of surviving up here. "Are you angry?" "Angry." He looked stunned. "Emma, no, I'm not angry." He pulled her close, his hand moving to her still, flat stomach. "I'm terrified, but not angry. Never angry." Relief flooded through her. "I'm terrified too. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I wanted to be sure, and I needed to." She stopped trying to find words. "There's something you need to know." She told him about the rattlesnake bite, about the fever, about what the doctors had said, half-remembered medical terms about damaged tissue and slim chances and low probability, about Rose's poisonous revelation and Emma's own deep-seated fear that her body was too broken to do this most basic thing. Cole listened in silence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough. "You think I care about that? I think you should know what you're facing. I might lose this baby. Might not be able to carry to term. Might, Emma." He cut her off, his hand cupping her face. Listen to me. Whatever happens, we face it together. You hear me? Together. If you carry this baby and it comes healthy, that's a blessing. If you lose it, we grieve and we try again. If you can't have children, then it's just us and that's enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks. How can you say that? Every man wants children, wants sons. I want you. Everything else is extra. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. You're enough. You've always been enough. Emma clung to him and cried, releasing years of fear and shame and the belief that her broken body made her worthless. And Cole held her and let her cry and whispered promises into her hair about facing whatever came together. The next morning, Emma woke feeling different, lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't know was there, and someone had finally lifted it. She made breakfast, and when Cole came in from checking the horses, she smiled at him with something like joy. We're going to be parents. He smiled back, real and warm and unguarded. Yeah, we are. They spent that day doing nothing important, just walking through the meadow, talking about names and futures, and all the small, mundane hopes that came with making a family. It felt indulgent taking a whole day off from work, but it also felt necessary. Like they needed to mark this moment, acknowledge it before the reality of winter and childbirth, and all the hard things to come crash down on them. Late afternoon, they were sitting on the porch when they heard horses. Plural. Cole's hand went to his rifle, instinctive. Visitors this far out were unusual, and unusual could mean dangerous. Two riders emerged from the tree line. One was a man Emma didn't recognize, broad-shouldered and trail-worn. The other was a woman in a riding dress too fine for mountain travel, blonde hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. Rose. Emma's blood went cold. She stood slowly, Cole rising beside her. You know them. The woman is my sister. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd heard enough about Rose to know this wasn't a social call. They rode into the yard. The man helped Rose dismount with a gentleness that spoke of more than professional courtesy. Rose looked around the cabin, the meadow, the rough mountain setting, and her lip curled with distaste. Well, this is quaint. Emma didn't move from the porch. What are you doing here, Rose? Can a sister visit? Rose's smile was bright and false. I've missed you, Mother too. We've been so worried. Somehow I doubt that. Rose's smile sharpened. Emma, I've ridden for 2 days to see you. The least you could do is offer hospitality. Emma glanced at Cole. He gave a small nod. Frontier law. You offered hospitality to travelers, even unwanted ones. Even when every instinct said they'd brought trouble with them. Fine, come in. The man introduced himself as Jack Monroe, a guide Rose had hired in Fort Benton. He was polite but clearly uncomfortable with whatever scheme Rose was running. Emma showed them where they could stable their horses, offered them water and food. Rose picked at the simple meal Emma prepared, her disdain barely concealed. So this is how you live now, how rustic. It's home. Emma kept her voice level. And yet you left Mother's post after barely 3 months of knowing this man. Married him without any real courtship. It all seems so sudden. Rose's voice dripped false concern. We were worried you'd been coerced or tricked. I wasn't. Are you sure? Because Mr. Bennett does seem much older than you, much more experienced. It would be easy for a man like that to take advantage of someone so desperate. Cole's hand tightened on his coffee cup. Oh, but he said nothing. Emma felt fury rising in her chest. Say what you came to say, Rose. Rose set down her fork, abandoning pretense. Mother's going to lose the post. The bank is foreclosing. She has 1 month before she loses everything. Emma had known it was bad, but not that bad. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you because you're up here playing house while our mother loses everything Father built? I didn't abandon her. I got married. To a man who wanted you for your working hands, not your charms. Let's not pretend this is a love match. Emma felt Cole stiffen beside her. Before she could respond, he spoke, his voice cold and level. You should leave. Rose turned to him, her smile vicious. Touched a nerve, did I? Or is the truth just uncomfortable? The truth is you rode 2 days to come here and insult your sister in her own home. The truth is you can't stand that she's happy, that she found something good when you expected her to die alone and grateful for scraps. Rose's face went white with rage. How dare you? I dare because this is my home, and she's my wife, and you're not welcome here. He stood, his size suddenly imposing in the small cabin. You'll stay tonight because it's not safe to travel in the dark. But first light you leave, and you don't come back. Emma, Rose turned to her sister, trying one last time. You can't honestly want to stay here, in this hovel, with him, when you could come home, help mother. Maybe even find someone better suited to get out. Emma's voice was quiet but absolute. Get out of my house, now. Rose stared at her like she'd been slapped. Then she grabbed her riding cloak and stormed out, Monroe following after her with an apologetic glance back. Emma and Cole stood in the sudden silence. Outside, they could hear Rose's voice sharp and angry, and Monroe's calmer tones trying to soothe her. Emma was shaking with fury and something else, something like fear. She's right about one thing. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. What? Your mother, if she loses the post? That's not my responsibility anymore. She's your mother. And you're my wife. My responsibility is here. To you. To this. He gestured at the cabin, the life they'd built. Not to the mother who only saw your value when it could save her investment. Emma knew he was right, but guilt gnawed at her anyway. Catherine had raised her, fed her, kept a roof over her head. And now she was losing everything while Emma was safe and fed and loved in the mountains. I should visit after the baby comes. Make sure she's all right. Cole nodded slowly. If that's what you need to do, we'll do it, together. But not now. Not while you're pregnant and winter's coming. Spring, after the baby's born and you're strong, then we'll go down and see what can be done. You do that for my mother. I do it for you. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. Emma moved into his arms, and he held her while outside Rose raged and plotted, and Monroe tried to convince her to let it go. Emma knew her sister wouldn't let it go. Rose never let anything go. But for now, in Cole's arms, Emma felt safe, protected, loved. They gave Rose and Monroe the cabin that night, sleeping in the lean-to with the horses. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than sharing space with Rose's poison. At first light, just as Cole had said, they watched Rose and Monroe ride out. Rose didn't look back, just sat rigid in her saddle and disappeared into the tree line, taking her rage with her. She'll be back. Emma spoke quietly. Maybe. Cole put his arm around her. But by then you'll be stronger. We'll be stronger. And whatever she brings, we'll face it. Emma leaned into him, hoping he was right, praying he was right. But something in her gut said this wasn't over, that Rose's visit was just the beginning, that the storm gathering on the horizon was worse than any spring blizzard. September bled into October. The aspen turned gold, then dropped their leaves. The mornings carried frost. The pregnancy progressed, and Emma's body changed, her stomach beginning to round. Cole was fascinated by it, would put his hand on her belly at night and talk to the baby, telling it stories about the mountains, about its mother, about the life they were building. Emma's morning sickness eased, but other discomforts took its place. Her back ached. Her feet swelled. The bad leg hurt more than usual, the extra weight throwing off her balance. But she kept working, kept doing what needed doing, because winter was coming, and you didn't survive winter by being delicate. They were laying in the last of the firewood one afternoon when Cole stopped suddenly, his head cocked. You hear that? Emma listened. Horses again, multiple horses, more than two this time. Cole's face went hard. Get inside, get the rifle. Fear spiked through Emma, but she did as he said, moved into the cabin, grabbed the rifle, loaded it with shaking hands. Through the window, she watched 5 riders emerge from the trees. Rose was in front, but she wasn't alone. Behind her rode 4 men, hard-looking characters who carried themselves like trouble. One of them was Monroe, but the others were strangers. Armed, dangerous. Cole stood in the yard, his own rifle held loose but ready. Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd positioned himself between the riders and the cabin, between them and her. Rose dismounted, smiled. But there was something wrong with the smile, something triumphant and cruel. Hello again, sister. I hope you don't mind. I brought friends. Emma's hands tightened on the rifle. Through the window, she watched her sister's face, saw the malice there, and knew with cold certainty that whatever was coming next would change everything. One of the men dismounted, tall with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes like chips of ice. He looked at Cole, then at the cabin, then back at Cole. When he spoke, his voice was rough and amused. "So you're the man who married Rose's sister. Heard a lot about you." Cole didn't respond, just waited. The scarred man smiled. "Name's Caleb Thorne. Rose here tells me you've got quite the setup. Good land, good water, good wife." The way he said the last word made Emma's skin crawl. "She also tells me you might be willing to sell for the right price." "Not interested." "Now don't be hasty. I'm prepared to be generous." "Said I'm not interested." Thorne's smile widened. "That's unfortunate, because see, I'm interested, real interested, and I generally get what I want." He gestured to the men behind him. "I brought some help, just in case you needed convincing." Emma's heart hammered. Through the window, she saw Cole's hand shift on the rifle, saw the calculation in his eyes. 5 against 1. Bad odds, but he wasn't backing down. "You need to leave. Now." "What, you'll shoot us, all of us, before we shoot back?" Thorne laughed. "You're outnumbered, friend, outgunned. Smart thing would be to take my offer. Walk away with your life and enough money to start over somewhere else. And the woman, what about her?" Thorne's eyes flicked to the cabin. "She can come with you, or she can stay. I'm flexible." The casual cruelty of it made Emma's blood run cold. This man didn't care about land or water or any of it. He cared about power, about taking what he wanted. And Rose had led him here, had brought this monster to their doorstep because she couldn't stand seeing Emma happy. Emma made a decision, opened the door, stepped out onto the porch with the rifle raised. "You need to leave." Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. "My land, my home, and you're not welcome here." Thorne looked at her, really looked, took in the birthmark, the limp, the swollen belly, the plain dress. Then he smiled, and it was the cruelest thing Emma had ever seen. "Well now, the lady herself, Rose said you weren't much to look at, but I assumed she was exaggerating." He turned to Rose. "You weren't." Rose's face flushed with satisfaction. Emma ignored her, kept the rifle trained on Thorne. "Last chance. Ride out. Don't come back. And we forget this happened. And if I don't, then I shoot you, and keep shooting until you're all dead or running." She meant it, every word. These men had come to take what was hers, had come to threaten Cole, had come because Rose in her spite and rage had sold them out. And Emma was done being the quiet sister, the grateful one, the one who accepted what she was given and didn't ask for more. Thorne must have seen something in her eyes because his smile faded. He glanced at his men, recalculating. A pregnant woman with a rifle wasn't much threat, but a pregnant woman with a rifle who looked ready to die before giving an inch. That changed things. "This isn't over." He mounted his horse. "We'll be back, and next time we won't ask nice." They rode out. Rose went with them, but she looked back once, met Emma's eyes, and the hatred there was pure and absolute. Emma had taken her rightful place, had stolen the man who should have been hers, had dared to be happy when Rose was not. And Rose would burn the world down before she let that stand. When they were gone, Emma lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Cole was beside her in an instant, taking the gun, holding her steady. "You all right?" "No." Her voice broke. "What have I done? What has she done?" "Not your fault. None of this is your fault." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that it was. That by choosing happiness, by choosing Cole, by choosing herself for once in her life, she'd set something terrible in motion. And now they'd have to face the consequences. That night they barricaded the door, kept the rifle loaded, took turns sleeping. Neither said what they were both thinking, that Thorne would be back. That next time he wouldn't come asking. That Rose had brought a wolf to their door and the wolf wouldn't leave until it got what it wanted or was killed. Emma lay in bed, Cole's arm around her, her hand on her swelling belly, and prayed. She wasn't sure she believed in God anymore. Too much had happened, too much hurt, but she prayed anyway to whatever might be listening for protection, for safety, for a way through whatever was coming, because something was coming. She could feel it like a storm on the horizon, dark and inevitable. And this time she didn't know if love would be enough to survive it. The days that followed lived under shadow. Cole didn't go far from the cabin, kept his rifle close, watched the tree line with eyes that never stopped calculating angles and distances and how fast he could get Emma to cover if shooting started. Emma hated it, hated the fear, hated that Rose had poisoned even this their sanctuary, the place they'd built together. But most of all, she hated feeling helpless. Her pregnancy was showing now, making her slower, clumsier. The bad leg was worse under the extra weight. She couldn't run, could barely ride. If Thorne came back, she'd be a liability, not a help. Cole never said it, but she saw it in his eyes every time he looked at her. The calculation, the worry, how to protect her when she couldn't protect herself. 1 week after Rose's visit, the first snow fell. Just a dusting, but it was a warning. Winter was coming early this year. They had maybe 6 weeks before the passes closed, and they were completely cut off from the outside world. 6 weeks before it would be just them and whoever came after them, with no help coming until spring. Cole made it a decision. We need to go to Fort Benton. Emma looked up from the shirt she was mending. Why bug? Because we need help. Need to report Thorne and what he's doing. Need to make sure there's a record legal claim filed. Something that says this land is ours and can't be taken. You think the law will help? Emma heard the bitterness in her own voice. Maybe, maybe not, but it's something. And I need to get supplies before we're snowed in. Things we'll need for the baby. Things I can't trap or hunt or make. He knelt beside her chair, took her hand. I know you don't want to leave. But if something happens, if Thorne comes back while I'm gone, or you go into labor early, we need people to know where we are. What's happening? We can't just disappear up here and have nobody know. Emma knew he was right, hated it, but knew it. How long? 4 days there, 2 days to handle business. 4 days back, 10 days total, maybe 11 if weather slows us. That's a long time. I know, but it has to be done. They left 3 days later, Emma riding the mare Cole on his buckskin with the pack horse trailing behind. The journey was hard on Emma. The constant riding made everything ache. Her back screamed, her leg throbbed. The baby kicked and squirmed like it could sense her discomfort. But she didn't complain. Just gritted her teeth and kept going because complaining wouldn't make it better, and they needed to do this. Needed to protect what they had while they still could. They reached Fort Benton on the afternoon of the 4th day. It wasn't much a rough collection of log buildings surrounding a trading post bigger and more established than Catherine's had ever been. But it had a land office, a marshal, a doctor. The infrastructure of civilization such as it was out here. Cole went to the land office first, filed claim papers on his property, paid the fees, got the documentation that said the land was his by law. Then they went to the marshal's office. The marshal was a man named Garrett Stone, no relation to the preacher who'd married them. He was maybe 50, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Cole's story with a face like carved wood, showing nothing. When Cole finished, Stone leaned back in his chair. Caleb Thorne. He said the name like it tasted bad. Yeah, I know him. He's been operating around here for about 2 years, taking land that doesn't belong to him. Intimidating homesteaders. Most folks are too scared to report it. Will you do anything? Stone looked at Emma, at her swollen belly, then back at Cole. What would you have me do? Ride up to your place with deputies and arrest him for making threats? He'll just deny it. Say it was a misunderstanding. And even if I could arrest him, I don't have the men to hold him. His crew would break him out before the trial. So we're on our own. You're always on your own out here. You know that. Stone stood moved to the window. Best I can do is keep your claim on record. So if something happens, if you disappear or the land gets taken, there's evidence. Something for the territorial court to look at when they finally get around to caring about what happens in the mountains. It wasn't much, but it was something. They spent that night at the fort's boarding house, a luxury after months of cabin living. A real bed with clean sheets. Hot water for washing. A meal Emma didn't have to cook. She should have enjoyed it. Instead, she lay awake worrying about the cabin, about what might be happening while they were gone, about whether they'd ride back to find it burned to the ground. Cole felt it too. She could tell by the way he held her tighter than usual, like he was afraid she might disappear. We'll figure this out, his voice in the darkness. I promise. We'll figure it out. How? I don't know yet, but I've survived worse. We'll survive this. Emma wanted to believe him. tried to believe him, but fear had its hooks in her now, and she couldn't shake it. The next morning, Cole took her to the doctor. A thin man named Webster who looked like he'd never been outside a day in his life, all pale skin and soft hands. But his eyes were sharp and he examined Emma with competent thoroughness. "You're healthy. Baby seems strong. Should be born around February, I'd say." He washed his hands in a basin. "Though given your history with that snake bite, you'll want to be careful. The damaged leg might make labor harder, and there's always risk with any birth, especially first ones." "She'll be all right, though." Cole's voice was tight. "Most likely. She's strong, tougher than she looks. But you should plan to have help. Someone experienced with birthing. There's a Shoshone woman named Dawn Running who—" "I know her." Emma spoke up. "She worked at my mother's post." "Good. Get her to come up before the baby's due. Having someone who knows what they're doing can make the difference between a good birth and a tragedy." They left the doctor's office with a list of supplies to buy and a weight in Emma's chest that wouldn't lift. The pregnancy had felt abstract before something happening to her body, but not quite real. Now it was real, terrifyingly real. A baby coming in the dead of winter in a cabin miles from help with her body damaged and uncertain, and enemies circling like wolves. They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies, cloth for diapers, medicine, extra blankets, things Cole didn't know how to make or find. The shopkeeper looked at Emma's belly and clucked sympathetically. "First baby, and you living all the way up in the high country, brave woman." "Or foolish," Emma muttered. "Same thing most times." The shopkeeper wrapped their purchases in brown paper. "You need anything else, you send your man down before the passes close. We'll make sure you're taken care of." It was kindness, unexpected and genuine, and it made Emma want to cry. She'd grown so used to cruelty to Rose's poison and her mother's disappointment that simple kindness felt overwhelming. They left Fort Benton the next morning, the pack horse loaded with supplies. The ride back should have taken 4 days, same as the journey down. But on the second day, Emma's body gave out. They'd stopped to rest the horse, and when Emma tried to dismount, her bad leg gave way completely. She would have hit the ground hard if Cole hadn't caught her. Pain shot up her spine, white hot and blinding. "Emma," Cole's voice sharp with fear. "I'm all right. Just need a minute." But she wasn't all right. The leg was swollen hot to the touch. The constant riding had inflamed the old damage, pushed it past its limits. She couldn't put weight on it without agony screaming through her. Cole made camp right there, even though it was only mid-afternoon. Made her lie down elevated, the leg wrapped it in cloths soaked in cold creek water. The swelling went down slightly, but the pain didn't. And Emma knew with sinking certainty that she couldn't ride. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for days. "We're sitting ducks out here." She spoke quietly, watching Cole work. "If Thorne's watching the trails, then we deal with it. But I'm not putting you on that horse until you can ride without injuring yourself worse." "Cole, no." His voice was absolute. "I won't risk you. I won't risk the baby. We stay here until you're ready, however long that takes." They stayed 2 days. Cole built a rough shelter, kept a fire going, stayed alert through the nights. Emma's leg improved slowly, the swelling going down, the pain becoming manageable instead of unbearable. But every hour they stayed felt like tempting fate. Felt like giving Thorne time to find them, to catch them vulnerable and exposed. On the third morning, Emma insisted she could ride. It was a lie, but a necessary one. They couldn't stay here forever. Cole knew it was a lie, but didn't argue. Just helped her mount, carefully adjusted the stirrups to take pressure off the bad leg, and they rode on. They reached the cabin on the 5th day after leaving Fort Benton. Emma had expected the worst, expected to find it burned or ransacked or occupied by Thorne's men. Instead, they found it exactly as they'd left it, undisturbed, peaceful, like the threat had been imaginary. But it wasn't imaginary. Cole found the signs immediately. Tracks around the cabin, too many for one person. Cigarette butts near the tree line, like someone had been watching, waiting. A fence post knocked over in a way that suggested it wasn't weather. Small violations, warnings. They'd been here, had looked, had decided not to act. Yet, why didn't they do something? Emma stood on the porch, looking at the evidence of intrusion, feeling violated. Because they want us scared, want us to leave on our own. Easier that way. No blood, no witnesses, just a homestead abandoned because the owners couldn't handle it. Cole started reinforcing the cabin, added bars to the windows, fixed the door so it could be barricaded from inside, set up a clear field of fire from the porch, prepared for siege. Emma helped where she could, but mostly she watched her husband prepare for war and tried not to think about what it would mean if war actually came. Tried not to think about giving birth while men with guns surrounded their cabin. Tried not to think about losing everything they'd built. October bled into November. The snow came in earnest now, heavy and constant. The passes closed. They were cut off from the outside world until spring. Just them and the mountains and whoever wanted them gone. Emma's pregnancy progressed. Her belly grew larger, the baby more active. She could feel it moving constantly now, kicks and rolls that were both wonderful and unsettling. Evidence of life, but also reminder of vulnerability, of what she had to lose. Cole was different now, harder, more watchful. He'd always been capable, but now there was an edge to him, something fierce and protective that hadn't been there before. He was preparing to defend what was his, and Emma was both grateful for it and terrified by it. They were chopping wood one afternoon, Cole swinging the axe while Emma stacked when they heard the horses again. Cole's head came up. Emma felt her stomach drop. They'd both known this was coming, had been waiting for it, but knowing didn't make it easier. Get inside, bar the door. Don't come out unless I call for you. Cole, please, Emma, just this once, do what I say without arguing. She saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself, for her, for the baby, and she couldn't fight that, couldn't make this harder than it already was. She went inside, barred the door, took the rifle and positioned herself by the window where she could see but not be easily seen. Her hands shook on the gun. The baby kicked like it could sense her fear. Through the window, she watched Thorn ride into the clearing. He had more men this time. 7 or 8, all armed, all hard-looking characters who'd done this kind of thing before. Rose wasn't with them, and Emma didn't know if that made it better or worse. Cole stood in the yard, rifle in hand, facing them down. 1 man against 8, impossible odds. But he didn't back down, didn't show fear, just stood there, solid and immovable. Last chance, Thorn's voice carried into the cold air. Walk away. Take the money. Keep your life. No, oi, 1 word, absolute. Then you're a fool and you'll die for nothing. Not nothing, for my home, my wife. That's everything. Thorn shook his head almost sadly. Could have avoided this. Could have been easy. He gestured to his men. Burn it. Emma's heart stopped. They weren't going to fight. They were going to burn the cabin with her inside. Smoke them out or watch them die. No witnesses, no evidence. Just another tragedy in the mountains. She watched 2 men dismount, saw them pulling torches from their saddlebags. Watched them light the torches from a small fire they built. Watched them start toward the cabin. Cole raised his rifle. Stop. They didn't stop. He fired. 1 shot deliberately high, the bullet whining past the lead man's head. The man froze, but Thorn just laughed. You've got 1 rifle, maybe 6 shots before you have to reload. There's 8 of us. Do the math. Cole did the math. Emma could see it on his face. Could see him calculating odds and finding them impossible. Could see him trying to figure out how to protect her when there was no way to protect her. Then Emma made a decision. She unbarred the door, stepped out onto the porch. 8 pairs of eyes turned to her. Cole's face went white. Emma, get back inside. She ignored him, raised her own rifle, aimed at Thorn. 2 rifles, 12 shots before we reload. How many of you die before we go down? Want to find out? Thorn studied her. The pregnant woman with the birthmark and the limp holding a rifle with hands that didn't shake anymore. Behind her, the cabin they'd built together. Beside her, the man who'd chosen her. Everything she had to lose. Everything she'd fight for. You'd die for this. I'd kill for it. Her voice was steady. You might take us down. Probably will. But some of you die first. Maybe you. Maybe him. She shifted her aim slightly to one of the men holding torches. Definitely whoever tries to set fire to my home. So ask yourself if this land is worth dying for. Because I already know my answer. Silence. The kind of silence that comes before violence or retreat. The men looked at Thorn, waiting for his call. Thorn looked at Emma and Cole, both armed, both ready, both willing to die before giving up what they'd built. Then from the tree line, a voice. Drop your weapons. Everyone turned. Marshal Stone stepped out from the pines, flanked by 4 deputies, all with rifles raised. Behind them came more men, homesteaders from other properties. Men Thorne had threatened. Men who'd been too scared to stand alone, but found courage in numbers. Stone moved forward, his rifle never wavering. Caleb Thorne, you're under arrest for extortion, illegal seizure of property, and attempted murder. You got no proof. Oh, got plenty of proof. Got 3 homesteaders willing to testify you did the same to them that you're doing here. Got tracks. Got witnesses who saw you making threats in Fort Benton. Got enough to hang you twice over. Stone looked at Thorne's men. Rest of you can drop your weapons and ride out, or you can stand with him and hang too. Your choice. One by one, the men dropped their guns, dismounted, put their hands up. They were hired hands, not fanatics. Dying for Thorne's greed wasn't worth it. Thorne sat, his horse rage and disbelief warring on his face. He'd been so sure, so certain this would work like it always worked. Intimidate the weak. Take what you want. Move on. But he'd underestimated Emma, had looked at her birthmark and her limp and her swollen belly and seen weakness, hadn't seen the iron underneath. The strength Cole had seen from the first day. This isn't over. Thorne's voice was pure venom. I'll be back, and when I am, you won't be back. Stone moved closer. Judge is coming through in spring. You'll be tried, convicted, and hung. And if by some miracle you get off, I'll make sure every homesteader, every trapper, every person in this territory knows what you are. You'll never work again. Never take another inch of land. You're done. They took Thorne and his men away. Emma watched them disappear into the trees, Stone and his deputies surrounding them. Watched until there was nothing left but quiet and the sound of wind in the pines. Then her legs gave out. Cole caught her, lowered her to the porch, held her while she shook. Not from cold. From relief and delayed fear and the realization of how close they'd come to losing everything. It's over. Cole's voice was rough. It's over. We're safe. Emma wanted to believe him, but she knew better. Thorne was gone, but Rose wasn't. Rose, who'd brought Thorne to their door. Rose, who'd tried to destroy everything Emma had found. Rose, who was still out there somewhere, still angry, still dangerous. But that was a problem for another day. For now, they were alive. The cabin still stood. Their home was still theirs. And that was enough. The homesteaders who'd come with Stone stayed long enough to help Cole finish the reinforcements on the cabin, to check the property, to make sure no one else was lurking. Then they left with promises to check in come spring to help if needed, to stand together against anyone who tried this again. Emma learned later that Stone had been watching Thorne for months, had just been waiting for enough evidence, enough witnesses willing to talk. Cole's complaint had been the catalyst, but it was the other homesteaders, scared and angry, and finally brave enough to speak, who'd sealed Thorne's fate. One of them, a grizzled man named Henry Cooper, stopped by the porch before he left. You did a brave thing today. Standing up like that made the rest of us remember we don't have to just take it. I was terrified. Emma admitted it freely. Being brave don't mean not being scared. Means doing what needs doing anyway. He tipped his hat. You take care of that baby. Territory needs more women like you. They left as the sun was setting, taking with them the last evidence of the day's violence. The dropped weapons, the churned up snow, the fear that had lived in the cabin for weeks. That night, Emma and Cole lay in bed holding each other tight. Neither spoke for a long time. Just breathed. Existed. Felt the gratitude of survival. Finally, Emma broke the silence. Stone knew. Knew we'd gone to Fort Benton. Knew we'd be coming back. That's why he was here. Yeah. He was protecting us. He was protecting property rights, justice, the law. We just happened to benefit. Don't minimize it. Emma turned to face him. He came because we asked for help, because we filed that claim, because we made noise instead of just accepting it. That matters. Cole kissed her forehead. You're right, it matters. I'm starting to understand something. What real strength isn't doing everything alone. It's knowing when to ask for help, when to stand together, when to let people see you're vulnerable so they can help protect you. She put his hand on her belly where the baby was moving. We're not alone up here, not really. We're part of something bigger, a community, people trying to survive together, and that's worth protecting. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, you're wiser than I am. Just practical. He laughed. Actually laughed the first real laugh since Rose had come with Thorn. The sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. They made love that night, gentle and slow, celebrating survival and love, and the life they'd built against impossible odds. And afterward, Emma lay in the darkness and thought about Rose, about her sister's face when she'd left with Thorn, about the hatred there. Rose was still out there, still a threat, but maybe not an immediate one. Thorn was going to hang. His men had scattered. Without his backing, Rose was just an angry woman with no power. She couldn't hurt them. Not anymore. Emma wanted to believe that, chose to believe it, because she had a baby coming and a husband to care for and a life to live. She couldn't spend that life looking over her shoulder waiting for the next attack. So she let it go. Let Rose go. Let the past go. Chose the future instead. Winter settled in hard after that. Deep snow, bitter cold. Days where they couldn't go outside without risking frostbite. But the cabin held, the food lasted. They had wood enough for 3 winters. And they had each other. Emma's pregnancy progressed. By December, she was huge, ungainly, unable to do much besides sit and knit and read. Cole did everything. Chopped wood, cooked meals, kept the cabin warm, rubbed her aching back, told her stories to pass the long dark nights. They talked about names, Margaret for a girl after Emma's grandmother, William for a boy after Cole's father. They talked about what they'd teach their child, how to read the mountains, how to survive, how to be strong and kind and brave. They talked about the future, maybe building a bigger cabin, maybe having more children if this one came safe, maybe eventually going back down to check on Catherine. Though Emma wasn't sure she wanted to, the post was part of her past. This cabin, this mountain, this man, that was her present and her future. January came. The snow was 10 feet deep in places. They were completely isolated now. No one could get in or out until spring. If something went wrong with the birth, Emma would die. They both knew it. Neither said it. Emma went into labor on a night in early February when the wind was howling like something alive, and the cold was so profound it hurt to breathe. She woke to cramping, felt the wetness between her legs and knew. Cole. Her voice woke him instantly. It's time. He moved faster than she'd ever seen him move, built up the fire, boiled water, laid out the supplies the doctor had told them to get, prepared to deliver their child alone because there was no other choice. The labor was long, brutal. Hours that stretched into a day, Emma crying out with pain, Cole holding her hand and wiping her forehead and whispering encouragements he wasn't sure he believed. The bad leg cramped made everything worse. She thought she might die, thought the baby might die, thought they might both die and Cole would be left alone in this cabin with their bodies and no way to escape until spring. But Emma was strong, stronger than she knew, stronger than the snake bite that had crippled her, stronger than the years of being told she wasn't enough, stronger than fear and pain and the possibility of death. She pushed, screamed, bled, fought. And finally, as dawn broke gray and cold outside the cabin, their daughter was born. Cole caught her, his hand shaking, cut the cord with a knife he'd sterilized in the fire, cleaned her with cloths dipped in warm water, wrapped her in the softest blankets they had. And when she cried that first thin wail of protest at being dragged from warm darkness into cold light, Cole cried too. He placed the baby in Emma's arms. She was tiny, red, wrinkled, perfect. All her fingers and toes. Breathing. Alive. Real. Margaret. Emma whispered the name, touching her daughter's face with wonder. Margaret Bennett. Cole knelt beside the bed, one arm around Emma, one hand touching their daughter's impossibly small head. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them, while outside the wind howled and the snow fell and the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. But inside the cabin, there was warmth. There was love. There was family. Emma had spent 27 years being invisible, being the broken sister, the unmarriageable one, the girl nobody wanted. And now she was a wife, a mother, loved, chosen, essential. She looked at Cole, at his weathered face and dark eyes, and the gentle way he held their daughter, and thought about the day he'd ridden into her mother's post, the day he'd looked past Rose's beauty and seen Emma's strength, the day everything had changed. Thank you. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. For what? For choosing me, for seeing me, for making me believe I was worth something. Cole leaned forward, kissed her forehead. You were always worth something. I just recognized it. That's not the same as creating it. Margaret made a small sound, and they both looked down at her, this tiny life they'd made together. This impossible, perfect thing. She's going to be strong like you. Cole said it like prophecy. And brave. And kind. She's going to change the world. Emma smiled, exhausted and happy, and more at peace than she'd ever been. She's going to be loved. That's all that matters. She's going to know every day of her life that she's loved and wanted and enough exactly as she is. Cole nodded, understood what Emma wasn't saying, that Margaret would never grow up feeling like she had to earn love, would never be the invisible one, would never wonder if she was second choice. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the Bennett family was safe and warm and whole, and that was everything. Spring came eventually, the snow melted, the passes opened. Cole rode down to Fort Benton with news that Emma and the baby had survived. Brought back Dawn running, who came to check on them to make sure Emma was healing properly, to teach her the things new mothers needed to know. Dawn held Margaret and smiled. She has your eyes and your strength. She'll be a force. She looked at Emma. You did well. Your mother would be proud. I doubt that. Emma couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. Then your mother is a fool. Dawn handed back the baby. You have everything that matters. Love, family, home. That's more than most people ever get. She was right. Emma knew she was right, but there was still a hole where her mother should have been, where Rose should have been. Family should have mattered, should have been there for this, but they weren't, and Emma had to make peace with that. Cole brought other news from Fort Benton. Thorne had been tried and convicted, would hang in 2 weeks. His men had scattered. The homesteaders he'd threatened were safe now, rebuilding, starting over. And Rose had disappeared. Left the territory entirely after Thorne was arrested. Nobody knew where she'd gone. East, probably. Back to civilization. Away from the mountains that had rejected her beauty and chosen Emma's strength instead. Emma tried to feel sorry for her sister, tried to find compassion. But mostly she felt relief. Rose was gone. The threat was over. They could live their lives without looking over their shoulders. Years passed. Margaret grew from infant to toddler to child. She learned to walk in the meadows surrounded by wildflowers, learned to ride on Cole's gentle buckskin, sitting in front of her father completely fearless, learned her letters from the books on Emma's shelves, learned the names of plants and animals and mountains, learned that her mother limped and had a mark on her face, and that neither of those things made her less, made her strong instead. 2 years after Margaret, Emma gave birth to a son, Daniel. Then 3 years later, another daughter, Grace. The cabin expanded. They added rooms, built a bigger smokehouse, cleared more land for the garden. The operation grew, prospered, not wealthy by any standard, but comfortable, secure, enough. Other families moved into the area drawn by the good land and the protection the law now provided. A small community developed, not a town exactly, just scattered homesteads within a day's ride of each other. People who helped each other, who stood together against whatever came, who made civilization out of wilderness, one cabin at a time. Emma became the person people came to when they were sick or hurt. Her knowledge of medicine, learned from books and dawn running, and years of experience made her invaluable. She delivered babies, set broken bones, treated fevers, saved lives. And in doing so, she finally understood what Cole had seen in her that first day. Not her usefulness, her competence, her capacity to take what was broken and make it whole. Catherine lost the trading post as they'd all known she would. She came to live with Emma and Cole for a winter when Emma was pregnant with Daniel. The visit was awkward, painful. Catherine couldn't quite accept that Emma had succeeded where Rose had failed. Couldn't quite believe this rough mountain life was better than the failed post had been. But she was grateful for the shelter, and Emma was glad to provide it. Family was complicated, but it was still family. Dawn Running told Emma years later that Rose had married an army officer, had gone east with him, had the fine house and society life she'd always wanted. Emma tried to be happy for her, tried to let go of the resentment and hurt. Sometimes she succeeded, sometimes she didn't. It was a work in progress forgiveness, but she worked at it, for herself more than Rose. One evening, maybe 10 years after their wedding, Emma and Cole sat on the porch watching their children play in the meadow. Margaret was teaching Daniel to shoot. Grace was gathering wildflowers, singing to herself, completely content. "You ever regret it?" Emma asked quietly. "Regret what?" "This, me, choosing the broken sister over the beautiful one." Cole turned to look at her. Really look. At the gray in her hair now, at the lines around her eyes, at the birthmarks she still carried and the limp that never went away. At all of her exactly as she was. Never, not once, not for a second. He took her hand. "You were never broken. You were just waiting for someone to see you right." Emma leaned against him, watching their children, their life, the home they'd built together from nothing. And she thought about that first day, about standing in the yard with wood chips in her dress while a stranger asked to court her, about the disbelief and confusion and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, someone saw a value in her. He'd seen it, and in seeing it, he'd made it real. Or maybe it had always been real, and she just hadn't known. Either way, she was here, loved, essential, whole. "Thank you for choosing me." Her voice was quiet. "Thank you for letting me." The sun set behind the mountains. The children came in for supper. The fire burned warm. And the Bennett family, built on love and partnership and the courage to stand together against whatever came, lived on in the high country where beauty was less important than strength, and second choices sometimes turned out to be the only choice that mattered.